Hey guys, before we dive into the show, I wanted to tell you about the perfect trailer cue blueprint, which is 100% free and you can download it right now over at thetrailermusicschool.com/blueprint. Now, this blueprint will help you to completely understand the structure of trailer music, how to build tracks that will be more licensable and have more impact and capture the right people's attention. So whenever you start writing a cue, make sure you've got this blueprint to hand and you can use it to help speed up your process, feel more confident that you've crafted a well-structured trailer cue before you send it off to that publisher or editor or supervisor. Okay, let's get into the episode.
One man, one microphone, and one medium-sized coffee. Welcome to the Trailer Music Composers Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the show. I wanted to give you guys the most comprehensive explanation, both written and verbal, and hopefully visual, of trailer hits. When I first started out, I was like, yeah, I know what an orchestral hit is. I'm really clever. Yes, I know what a drum hit is, thank you, sir. Yes, I've heard of taikos. Little did I realize there was a whole new world of explosions I had not explored. One trailer hit is not the same as another trailer hit. You could tell, you don't need to tell any music supervisor who are listening. You know what I'm talking about. Any editors who are listening. You're probably thinking, Rich, this is going to be at least 3 podcasts worth of material. And I'm saying, yeah, I'm not going in full depth, dude. The reason I want to talk about this is because, obviously hits are one of our biggest tools, literally, and not. They are one of the most useful tools to immediately trailerize something. Because to be honest, trailerization is just basically making the track have elements of the huge, elements of the massive, elements of the over the top. And these do so much for us. And it's about cinematic transitions as well. You listen to the best trailer cues that land the best trailers. They are absolutely crammed full of different hits and different transitions. I'm not saying that's all they are. I'm saying you can hear these composers and producers think about their transitions a lot. Because actually, I always thought trailer hits were kind of just like cymbal crashes. Bosh, emphasis. But they're not. They are so much more than that. They are transitions too, which is kind of all they are to me, other than that. But I have grossly underestimated the importance of cinematic transitions. Risers, yes. I know and love them very well. But thinking of hits as transitions, rather than necessarily just a boom or a smash or explosion, is really, really vital. So I'm going to talk about all the different types of hits that I think are relevant to us as composers and producers. I've probably missed some out. You're probably thinking, Rich, I can't believe you missed out the neoclassical boom swish hit. But, I'm going overarching things here, guys. Really, really useful things that are important to what we do as trailer composers and cinematic composers. Because to be honest here, most of us, if we're landing trailers, we're probably also landing TV shows, we're probably also landing ads, we're probably also landing promos, whatever it is, because our music has cinematic qualities. So, let's dive in. First and foremost is my favourite, the Swish Hit. The thing I like about the Swish Hit is you can hear it in the name, Swish Hit. It's basically a hit with a swish, a whoosh, a pre-roll before the main attack of the of the drums and the percussion. And the reason I like these is because these are kind of like everything all wrapped in one. They are normally so full of fantastic frequencies that they are sub-heavy as well as top-end heavy. They are the drums have just exploded in your face hits. But it's not just the explosion. It's the pre-roll, the cymbal roll, the reverse audio that happens beforehand, which gives this hit the power of the transition as well as the explosion of the impact. Now this one is really straightforward. If you just kind of think of it as like, in really simple terms, you've kind of got your drummer doing a cymbal roll on the ride, another drummer doing a very, very short snare roll just before, and then the snare, the floor tom, the kick, the crash, the china, the ride, all being splooshed at the same time. Now, the thing about this one is they're not generally metal heavy. So I know I said cymbals and stuff like that, but they're generally more crunch and smash heavy. I'm going to be using words like that, which are entirely technical terms, just so you know. I don't like to get into the details, particularly of frequencies, but the Swish Hit, this is the trailer hit, basically. Most trailer hits will have a pre-roll, a pre-hit, a swish, a transition before the hit. And these are so fantastic and so useful. That's why we've got so many libraries that do them. Rise and Hit by Native Instruments, Rise Eng Pro by Keep Forest, and all the different risers, all the different swishes that have hits. Impact Designer. There's so many of them that will have this swish hit creation in them, and they're fantastic. My favorite way to approach these is drag and drop samples. So I will have one of these tools and I will go into the wave files and drag them rather than having to do the whole faff of like, okay, play this in, is it in time? Because some of them aren't. And oh, no, it's not right now. And then I just end up exporting the audio anyway. So Swish Hit. Classic. Now, next one, sub booms, or just booms. But these are like the drum equivalent of the distant horn Brahms. It's a giant has just fallen from the sky so far away that none of the top end frequencies hit you. You just hear this. It's almost like that sound that you'd hear if there was an explosion underwater. Almost, I love these, particularly for not silent moments, but very, very quiet moments. So the beginning of Act 1, the stop down in between Act 2 and 3, and then into Act 3. These are so useful, but the thing about sub booms, you really have to be hard with the high cut on the frequencies, because they basically just want to be subs. Up to sort of 100, possibly 200 hertz. And they need a nice, lovely long tail. I mean, you can give them a bit more mid frequency if you'd like, but for me, the sub booms are just, really far off in the distance. And the reason that happens is because when big things happen in the distance, long frequencies, i.e. bass frequencies, travel further, so they don't get filtered out by all the chaff. Literally, in these fields, chaff. Anyway, which kind of brings me on to my next one, which is distant hits, which isn't the same thing because they're not so distant. So sub-booms generally don't have pre-hits. They generally don't, but you can obviously have them as well. Distant hits are what you would imagine halfway between that and a swish hit. It's the giant falling from the sky, but it's not so far away. It's a little bit closer, so you can hear the sound of the houses being crushed. So it's not just like, it's like with the sub-frequencies. Again, these are good as like a progression from the sub-boom. use them in Act 1, potentially Act 2. You can use like taikos with the top end rolled off, with a taiko roll. It's just thinking about the progression of this track, things starting far away and getting closer and closer. You start with the sub boom, then it's the distant hit, and then it's the swish hit, and then it's the death match hit, whatever it is. That's just made up. So moving on to things getting closer, the metallic hits. I'm not a huge fan of metallic hits. And what I'm talking here is I'm not necessarily just talking about the anvil hits that you'd hear in classical music. I'm talking about, it's just basically a hit that has a large amount of metal frequencies, or I don't want to say metal frequencies, but metal timbres is the correct term. Now, why would you need a metal hit? Surely the swish hit has everything. Yes, but sometimes the metal cuts through. Sometimes when you're doing a track that's kind of industrial, you want that kind of clang. Horror's good with metallic hits. You want the sound of somebody's head dropping onto a big oil drum. Bang! All these different timbres, different materials, that is, that are resonating, will create a different sense and a different feeling, a different landscape. So although I do a lot of organic horror thriller stuff, I don't often use the metal hits because they have a very, very distinct feeling about them, very distinct sound to them. So I think like Damage has like dumpster hits, which are great, and they cut through the mix really nicely, which again is a good thing about the metallic hits, but I'm not a huge fan of them. Maybe you need to convince me, guys. But anyway, when you're using metal hits, you don't need to think about them just as metal. They can be a swish hit that has a lot of metal sounds in it. It just cuts through differently, and it feels like it needs to have a different situation. I wouldn't use a metallic hit in like a epic orchestral track. If it was just orchestra, that is. I'd use a metallic hit in sort of a hybrid or a sound design cue. But that moves me on to Foley. Foley is like when you capture the sound of something real. Snapping a cucumber and using that as your hit. Now, Foley trailer hits aren't necessarily snapped cucumbers, but they have this feeling about them. It sounds like someone slamming a car door, but epic. Someone is snapping a cucumber, but epic. How do you make it epic? Compress it, put it in big reverbs. Or layer it with a sub boom. Give it a swish hit. Give it a pre-roll before the, a little bit of a nice cheese roll before the cucumber gets snapped. So Foley is great for horror. Great for horror. A snapping cucumber sounds terrifying, or even like a marrow being squashed by a hammer. Because it has this quality to it that no other hits have, because it's not the timbre of drum skins, it's not the timbre of plastic, it's not the timbre of metal, it's something else, something in real life. And that's the thing about the Foley hits, is they need to feel like they're almost like everyday. But epic. They are different to our next one, which is organic hits. Organic hits are kind of like somewhere between a swish hit and a Foley hit. It doesn't feel synthesized. It feels real, but not like cucumber in the fridge real. It's got warmth to it. It's got life to it. There might be a little bit of delay on some of the impact, so it's not all like tight, bang, quantized. It might be a bit slapdash. But it feels organic. And I don't mean, like the Soil Association organic. I mean tangible and real. Not Foley, like someone's just recorded you slamming a door, but that layered with a sub boom, layered with a taiko or something like that. Then we're going to go on to the orchestral hit, which is like, for me, I love the orchestral hit because it's where, this is where Stravinsky comes into the conversation, because it came from his Firebirds suite. And an orchestral hit is basically all the instruments of the orchestra, bang, hitting at the same time. Usually the same note. Timpani, cymbals, woods, violins, strings, brass, and then that obviously got sampled to death with hip-hop in the 80s and 90s, and then in pop in the 90s and 80s. And then it got put onto keyboards. So we all have orchestral hits on keyboards. Think about Michael Jackson. Is it bad? Bam, 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 bam. Do, 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 do. Yeah, that is bad, isn't it? Yeah, the start of Bad, orchestral hits. These are fantastic because when I think about the keyboard orchestral hits, I think, oh, that's disgusting. I don't ever want to use them. But then when I think to myself, it's just all the instruments hitting at the same time. I go, oh, actually, I do that quite a lot. I just put a pre-roll on it. And you use this for emphasis, to emphasize a part of what you're doing. I mean, you could argue that you do orchestral hits most act 3s because everything's hitting at the same time, but they're hitting. They're not starting a note. So it's good for percussive stuff, this, orchestral hits, and it's good for horror. You still get a lot of orchestral hits in horror, but they're usually sort of atonal orchestral hits, where it's not just one note, it's a cluster. That was a cluster, by the way. Which moves you on to horror hits. Again, horror hits, usually the thing that defines a horror hit is they have a little bit of Foley, they have a little bit of organic, they have a little bit of swish, they have a little bit of everything, and then they have some screams. It's kind of like on top of a hit. It has something terrifying, screeching violins or screaming people, basically. It is usually screeching strings or screeching something to kind of give it that kind of fright aspect. And it might have a very, very quick rip or riser into the note, rip before the note. And it might be a little wonky as well. Things not quite landing. That type of thing. Not quite landing at the same time. And it's for the element of like, element of shock and surprise. And they're usually thrown in when you're not expecting them. Or if you are expecting them, they sound unexpected. Hence the wobbly sounds. I mean, I like the horror hits, but I just love a swish hit. What can I say? Anyway, I'm getting distracted. There's 2 more that I want to talk about. One of them is the underwater hit. I was in 2 minds as to whether to include this, because this for me is essentially the sub boom, because you want to think about the way the sound frequencies work. But then I was thinking, actually, it's kind of like the hits you would imagine that you would hear on a submarine. Explosions underwater, sonar, that type of thing. It has a very unique quality that isn't just a sub boom in the distance. The reverb isn't quite as long. It feels muffled, but it's still got something to it, which you don't necessarily get with sub booms and distant hits. So if you're not sure about this one, it's just thinking about it like as if it's in a submarine. And when the hell would you use an underwater hit if you're writing a track that is designed for that type of thing? And this is more like the world of editors, to be honest with you. But if you're writing a track that, like, what was it? I want to say The Taste of Water. What was that movie? The Smell of Water? The Feel of Water? I can't remember. That wanted a lot of water feeling to it. So that would have been perfect for an underwater hit. But like I said, we're getting now into that area where, okay, you just put a descriptive word before the word hit and you're into its own subgenre. And you do get this with some hit libraries where it's like leafy hit, woody hit, woody epic hit, So, the world is your oyster when it comes to textures and timbres and genres. You merge any of those 3 and you can create your own thing of hits, but it's got to be focused on what situation you are using it in. You know? Like you wouldn't chuck a horror hit on an uplifting piano track. Well, you could do, but it might feel a little out of place unless it's a horror track that's supposed to be sort of twisting this beautiful piece of piano music. It's all about context. You've got to think about what context you're using the stuff in. And that sometimes it's very difficult because you get so wrapped up in what you're doing that you forget to think about the context. And that's what this stuff is all about. You almost have to approach your track like a trailer editor would. How am I transitioning from this section to this section? What hit is going to be most effective? What textures and timbres are going to be most effective here? Which brings me on to the last one. I'll save this one to last because it's kind of like the pick and mix. It's the hybrid. The hybrid hit. And for me, these have a little bit of everything, but the main element here is the mixture of organic and electronic. That's where the hybrid hit sits. And it sits in hybrid stuff. I'm not going to go on too much about that because I feel like you got the gist of it. I've been talking about hits so much so that I've kind of forgotten the purpose of this podcast. I think if you're going to take any lesson from this, and no, the lesson isn't to go podcasting when it's a windy day, not to go podcasting when it's a windy day. The lesson here is for you to understand that there are so many subtle tools in the impact world that you can use to help your track grow and become a thing of its own. It doesn't have to be just a case of, hey, you know what, I'm just going to chuck this massive swish hit here and this massive swish hit here because they sound massive. Think about it in the same way you'd think about, some of you, your synth lines. I've seen you sitting there tweaking your knobs for ages. And the same with you orchestral writers, thinking about all the different articulations. It's the same with your hits. Think of them as a colour that you are adding to your canvas. And they will really lift a track. I mean, like I said right at the start, they're a surefire way to trailerize anything. Because they are a kind of unique vocabulary to the trailer world, really. I mean, you get it in other genres too, but not in the same way. The cinematic transitions are part of our compositions, and all these different hits are there for us to use and utilize, and they're so important. This goes out to anyone writing stuff for films and things as well. You don't have to go for the big cinematic swish hits, but, you know, understanding how the sound works and why you're going to use a sub-boom here and why you'd use a horror hit here, and it really helps you to understand how to let your track grow and become its own thing in and of itself. Anyway, I hope you guys are enjoying this. Go check out the post. I'll put it in the link in the show notes. And if you haven't had time, please take a couple of minutes to review the show. I really would appreciate it. Like I said, just because it kind of gives me a funny feeling in my tummy. And it's nice to hear that you guys are enjoying the show. Anyway, I hope you guys are well, and I hope you're enjoying your week, and I shall see you in the next episode.
Amazing.